breaking barriers and bridging the gaps between patients and doctors. Welcome to Brainstorming with the Docs and your co-hosts, Dr. Glenn Harrison and Dr. Kolby Condos.
All right, everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Brainstorming with the Docs. I'm Dr. Kolby Condos, my co-host, Dr. Glenn Harrison.
Hey, Dr. Kolby.
What's going on, buddy?
Doing well. I'm looking forward to this one. I think because you were talking about earlier, have you had a patient that was asking you this exact question?
Yeah, it was. So I had a patient come in. They asked me, hey, one of my family members is concerned that they might have MS. What do they do to diagnose MS? And I was like, oh, that's a great question. Maybe this is something we should cover in a podcast. Because if you have questions, maybe someone else does. If you have questions and you're listening to this or watching this and you'd like to get a hold of us, you can always do so at info@brainstormingwiththedocs.com. Otherwise, turn on notifications, hit like and subscribe because we're going to keep rolling out content like this each and every week. And you never know when we might cover your question. So yeah, how do you diagnose MS? So first off, what is MS? Right? Yeah. MS is an autoimmune disease that is a demyelinating disease. So what myelin is an insulator that covers your nerves. And basically what it does is it allows for the propagation of action potentials down the nerve without that action potential or stimulus being degraded. So it's a way to keep signals in the nerves and keep them going really, really fast.
Versus not.
Yeah, versus not. So if you have MS, that myelin sheath or that insulating sheath around your nerve starts to break down and degrade, and you can lose the action potential within nerves, or the nerves can be more susceptible to pressure or whatever the function of that specific nerve is, chemical changes that it responds to, or pressure changes, or, relaying that information from the end organ all the way to the spinal cord and then on to the brain. So it can really alter that.
That's right. And the numbers are quite staggering. And I know since I've been in practice now, my senses are up to try to, identify if it's been missed, because there's a lot of it. MS is the stats we're just looking at, like 1 million right now, million in the United States diagnosed. This is diagnosed. Yeah. And previous to that, the prevalence was 400,000, more than double of what the previous prevalence of this disorder is. So there's a lot of crazy stuff with MS. You see stats, farther you get away from the equator, you have, higher rates. We've talked all about this in the MS podcast we dedicated a podcast just to MS. Now this is more about diagnoses, so I don't want to get in the weeds because I know you and I will do that. So that's a little bit about MS and the prevalence of it. A little bit about the onset. What were the stats? 15 to 20, 15?
Yeah, it's more common in females. And usually the onset is, I think what I remember off the top of my head was 20 to 50 is usually the first incident. Now, whether that incident is like correlated to the diagnosis or if it's like retrospective where they're like, oh, this is really weird that I started having these in my early 20s. But that's usually the first, episode. Usually occurs between 20 and 50, I think, or 15 and 50 was the other number I read.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of younger people with it that it was diagnosed, and whether it was aggressive or whether it was more, it wasn't as aggressive. It was just random type bizarre symptoms. But once someone gets a diagnosis of MS, naturally it's life-changing. It's just this thing that you can't shake, and there's a lot of fear around it, and rightfully so. So hopefully, people are listening to this podcast, they have a weird symptom. They're not just going to, jump to MS, but by no means is this a replacement for medical advice. This is just a podcast. Right.
This is just
high level, thought and information. And
let's just cover some of the signs and symptoms of MS, right? If you're like, I'm having these weird symptoms. So if you have any sort of like acute, unexplainable burning, shooting, lancing pain, it can be numbness and tingling. It can be burning. It can be sharp zap-like, experiences in your nerves. If you're starting to lose like loss of motor functions, a lot of the times when I do, at least in my patients that have MS, because I have a couple of them that have, pretty much all of them are positive for what's called internuclear ophthalmoplegia, which is where it actually affects the way that your eyes work together. So you can also have, vision changes, you can have, blurriness, you can have dizziness, you can have disequilibrium, vertigo type symptoms, you can have pain behind your eyes with like optic neuritis. And basically it can affect anywhere. It can affect any nerve. And that's actually when I move into like what you look for when you're trying to diagnose MS. That's really what you look for. You either use like a lumbar puncture or a cerebral spinal fluid draw, where they look for actual myelin debris, so chunks of the myelin insulator around the nerves floating around in your spinal fluid, right? If that is, then you can be pretty sure that there's an active demyelinating disease. They will look on MRIs to see if there's any active lesions where it'll show up on an imaging. In some cases, this one isn't as common. Most of the time it's MRI and CSF draws in my experience, but they can use like nerve conduction studies to see if there's any breakdown of the nerve, especially if it's following one specific nerve. Now, or it can even be like a cranial nerve exam or a peripheral nerve exam, and you just correlate those findings with other studies, because in a lot of cases, they don't want to diagnose MS off of just one finding. Right. They want to correlate that with other findings, with images, with studies, with, CSF draws and that kind of stuff. So if you have weird symptoms that are neurological in nature and they seem to be getting worse, don't ignore them.
Yeah. And also the characteristic of the symptom, more of an onset with some kind of physical, chemical, or emotional stress in your life. That can also be a telltale sign. You aggravate your autoimmune disorder, because MS is this autoimmunity. You aggravate it at that time, and then the tissue gets more injured, or the myelin gets more degenerated, and then you have a flare, and then you have like an MS flare. So pay attention to the timing of the symptoms, I think, is important as well. It's not.
Yeah, and there's different types of MS. We won't cover those because we already did in the other podcast. But if you have questions about it, then go ahead and look back onto that episode, because we cover it a little bit more in depth. This was more about just the diagnosing part of MS. So yeah, if you guys have questions of your own that you'd like us to cover, you can reach out to us again. Our contact information for the podcast is info@brainstormingwiththedocs.com. You can find a lot of information on our websites. Mine is northlakescheropractic.com. Dr. Glenn's is drgharrison.com. Or just stay tuned and watch all the episodes as they roll out, because we're going to continue to roll out new content each and every week, and hopefully it's applicable to you at some point.
That's right.
So yeah, this one was pretty short, simple, to the point. Hopefully you guys got value out of it.
Yeah. And not everybody has MS with a neurological symptom, but get the proper help for it, and then dive into it.
Yeah, be sure.
Yeah, be sure. I like that. So anyhow, I look forward to the next one, Dr. Kolby.
All right, buddy. Sounds good. Have a good evening.
You too.